Our gospel lesson comes from Luke, chapter number 15. This is a pretty long reading, but it is a familiar and wonderful story. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property on dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went off and hired himself out to be one of the citizens of that country, and one of the citizens of that country sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion and ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has gotten him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" May God bless the reading and hearing of this word. May each of us hear in it a word that is to us and is for us on this day. For every one of us gathered in this room today, there is a person who lives within the orbit of our lives who is our Lenten person. And I'm not talking about the person that makes you feel good, makes you laugh. No. I'm not talking about that person who makes you light up every time that you see them, because they light up a little bit every time they see you. I'm not talking about that person who, when you enter the room, you lock eyes with that person and you make a beeline to one another because you just make one another feel warm and fuzzy. I'm not talking about that person. That person is your Easter person. No, I'm talking about your Lenten person. Remember, Lent is a time of testing. So I'm talking about that person who irritates the stew out of you. You don't like their politics. You don't like their religion. You don't like the bumper stickers on their car. A car which, by the way, you feel like uses too much gas. We all have Easter people and Lenten people in our lives. We have people who make us feel good in our hearts, and we have people who just get on our nerves a bit. Here's the thing, though. Our Lenten people have something to teach us. For one thing, most of the time when we are really turned off by a person, there is something about them that reminds us of something about us that we haven't come to terms with yet. But secondly, our Lenten people help us to discern just how serious we are about love being the central value of our faith. Our story today, it really is a famous story, but one that adds a wrinkle to this whole idea. What happens when our Lenten people are a part of our family, a part of our inner circle? But before we get to the story, let's talk about audience. Audience, anybody that's ever spoken publicly knows, or taught in front of a class knows that you got to know your audience. Audience is important. And audience is an issue in today's parable. The story of the prodigal son is so rich, such a great story, that sometimes we rush past the initial verses which describe the audience to get to the story. But missing the audience would miss the point and the purpose of the story. Let me read it again. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners, and he eats with them." So he told them a story. It was a complex audience that had gathered on that day. There were the tax collectors and sinners who were hearing good news. Really what they were hearing was great news. These were those who before had occupied a place outside of the circle, and they are hearing the wonderfully good news that there is a place for them on the inside. That's the best of news. But congregating around, maybe on the edges, but close enough to be a part of the audience, were the Pharisees and scribes who might be pictured with their arms crossed, their heads wagging. He hangs out with sinners, and he eats with them. They weren't hearing great news or good news or even acceptable news. They were being shaken to their very core by news that they couldn't get their heads and especially their hearts around. For their world made sense when they stood on the inside and enjoyed the benefits of being on the inside, all the while guarding the gate and keeping these other folk, this riffraff, in their place. So they couldn't get their heads. More importantly, they couldn't get their hearts around the realm of God that Jesus was announcing. What an encapsulation. This is a snapshot of the prophetic task of the church. It was a humorist in the early 1900s who said this about the written newspaper, although he could have just as easily been speaking of the church when he said, its task is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. That is the prophetic task of the church. As an audience to the story, which now we are an audience to the story, as an audience to the story, we are invited in. And that is a part of this story's greatness. It invites us in to find our own place in it. And we don't really know until we get in there and into the story whether we're going to hear news that is comforting, announcing for us a place in the circle, or maybe when we get in there, we're going to hear some discomforting news, reminding us just how big the circle is and just who all we're going to have to share it with to take our place in it. It is likely that depending on many things, that we will identify with one brother or the other. Okay, if you are the youngest in the birth order of your family, then maybe you identify with the younger brother. Or even if you're just impetuous by nature, maybe you'll identify with that younger fella. Debbie Thomas is a blogger and commentator who said, and I empathize with this, that she had preached on this passage so many times that she didn't have anything else to say about it. So she decided, instead of writing a sermon, to write letters to the two brothers. She claimed, and she was an older sister in her own family, she claimed to be different from the younger brother, but did relate to him in this way. Listen to these words. At least you and I have this in common. I know what it's like to hunger for love, for depth, for passion, for joy. And I know what it's like to imagine an exotic elsewhere, a more perfect nourishment, miles away from my holy parents' all too familiar table. I know what it's like to come to myself in the broken, impoverished places of my own foolish fashioning and to long for the warmth and the sustenance of home. I don't like you, younger brother, but maybe we're not so different after all. The younger brother, and I'm one of those, at some level we get him. We know him. We understand him. But maybe that's not you. Maybe you're the oldest in your family. Or maybe responsibilities were just heaped on you at an early age and you had to learn to deal with that. Or for whatever reasons you are prone to be the responsible one. Maybe it is the older brother that you identify with. But we're going to come back to him. Let's just leave the older brother there for a minute. I agree with the Catholic mystic Henry Nouwen, who said that at some point we have to stop with our identification with the younger brother or older brother and seek to become like the Holy Parent. To begin to grasp who this Holy Parent is, the father in this story, we must consider what honor meant in the ancient Middle East. To us, honor does mean something, but to them it meant everything. Their place in the community hinged on their honor. Honor gave people their status in community. And when honor was lost to a family, everything was lost. Honor had been stripped from the father when the younger son demanded and received his inheritance. Honor had been stripped from the father when the boy left home. Honor had been stripped from the father when news of his debauchery made its way back home to the community. And whatever honor remained would be stripped away, get this is important, if he took the boy back. And if taking him back were not enough to strip any sliver of remaining honor away, there is the fact, and this becomes important in this story, that old men were not supposed to run. Running was for the graceful, for the young. It was not for those whose grace had been stolen from them by the passing of time. For an old man, this is important, a patriarch to run was a thing of great dishonor. It is honor and its collision with profound love which sets the stage for this portion of the story. And what we could use as a good director to set the stage for us. Because we need to use our imaginations for this. Perhaps it is the neighbors who see the boy first. He's coming up the road. He's a walking picture of youthful arrogance which has culminated in defeat. The gait of his walk gives it away. The slump of his shoulders. The bowed head. They tell the story of a broken and wasted life. Reeking of pigsty, and perhaps if his older brother was right, the perfume of his prostitutes. The boy walks head down, shoulders slumped, shuffling up the road, a picture of shame. Amazingly, however, he's not really the target of the neighbor's disdain. Everybody's seen this before. Young people get out of their lane, head out, make young people kind of mistakes. Reckless youth who left home early only to wreck their lives. The great disdain was not for the boy, it was for the father who had been stripped of his honor. The boy had never attained a place. He had nothing to lose. It was the father who had fallen the furthest. So they look at the haggard boy, these neighbors, as he comes up the road. And they look back to the porch where the father sits, back and forth, to the boy, to the father. Their gazes shift from the boy to the old man. Then they look one more time, and when they look back on the porch, the old man isn't there. Perhaps he has gone inside and locked the door to salvage the tiny sliver of honor that he has left. But then they see it. There's another figure on the road. It's the old man. And can you believe it? The old coot is running. Pale ankles showing beneath his robe as it flies about in the wind. This undignified old man, devoid of dignity. But if only they were closer, they would hear him winded and breathless, saying, "To hell with honor, to hell with dignity." He refuses even to hear the flimsy speech of repentance and wraps his arms around his son. All he knows is that his lost son has been found, and nothing else matters. Henry Nouwen is right. Our journey in Lent and in life is meant to land us here, knowing that the love, which is the only thing and the eternal thing, isn't some flimsy greeting card sentiment. And if that is believed, it's because we misrepresented it. It is a force of tenacity and stubbornness that refuses to let the beloved go. Never is it a sign of weakness. It is always a sign of the only strength that really matters. Now, if the credits were to roll right now, man, what a great story we would have. A Hollywood happy ending. The younger brother's home. There's a party going on. Some dancing like we've already seen this morning. What a great segue to my sermon. But it doesn't end there. And since it is Lent, it is the ambiguous open ending which must be our take-home piece today. Since it's Lent, we're not going to be able to end with the feel-good party. For the framers of the lectionary bring this back around to us during the Lenten season precisely because it doesn't allow us to rush to the comfort we seek or the certitude which we think religion is beholden to provide us. No, this story leaves us standing with the older brother and with questions in our hands. We have to figure out what to do with this older brother because maybe you noted the story just ends. The story just ends with the older brother standing on the outside. The father's embrace of the lost son may be the point of the story which tugs most insistently upon our heartstrings, but the most penetrating questions come to the surface when the older brother refuses to go inside the house where the welcome home party is raging full blast. Here's what he says. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes home, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. This son of yours. In one sentence, he has declared his alienation from his father and his brother. And that is how the story ends. The older brother is standing on the outside of the house, as lost as his younger brother ever was. The only companions that he has are his anger, his loneliness, and the assurance that he was right and his younger brother was wrong. Standing in a hell of his own making, those are his only companions. While the joy of the celebration is just on the other side of the door. I don't want the story to end there, but it does. Just like the younger brother, I want the older brother to make his way back and to make his way inside. But alas, the only vindication the older brother receives is that he gets to write the end of his story. I'm not sure if that is good news, or like the scribes and the Pharisees in the story, it is news too difficult to hear. Luke doesn't write an ending for the older brother, so we must write one for him. Or better put, we must write one of our own. This season requires not that we end with the answers to the questions. This season requires that we just walk out of here with the questions in our hearts and in our minds. These are some of the questions that the older brother requires that we ask. Will we accept the challenges of living in diverse community, or will we live in a divided and dividing world of us and them? And so, our story will be told. Will we live in the vulnerability of the choice to trust, or will we live in the protective shell of the choice to live in distrust? And so our story will be told. Will we believe in a world in which there is enough to sustain every human being if only we would share its resources? Or will we live in a world of scarcity in which our competitors must be eliminated? And so our story will be told. Will we be prophetic, or will we be popular? And so our story will be told. Will we teach the next generation the value of every life, or that some lives are to be valued more than others? And so our story will be told. Will we forgive our sisters and brothers, or will we no longer know them as sisters and brothers? And so our story will be told. Will we choose hope? And will hope inspire us to work together? And will working together lead us to a new day? Or will we resign ourselves to a world which is less than it could be? And so our story will be told. Will we live freely and love fully and so become what we were made to be? Or will we, like the older brother, choose pride as our companion? And so our story will be told. The older brother stood on the outside looking in. The only vindication that was his was that he was allowed to tell the rest of his story. And so will we. We leave here today not with answers, but with questions. Amen.